What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Conquer Athlete podcast. After some technical difficulties, this is take number 5, but we're here ready to record. Myself, Ryan Bucciantini, and Jason Leydon, ready to drop some knowledge on you guys. If just as a little preface, Jay is out at another Power Monkey camp, so if this sounds a little bit off, we're working out of a shed in Idaho and Starbucks in Tennessee.
Tennessee, yeah, Crossville. You know what, Ryan? We are raw dogging this podcast. We're taking it back to the original state of podcasting. We're getting away from the fancy studios. We are anti-studio. We are anti-soundproof, and we're all about giving the listener something real. Because in this world, there's a lack of realness, and now we're getting back to the realness. Do you think anybody bought that?
Yeah. If authenticity is a plywood shed in the middle of nowhere, then we're killing it. I'm just waiting for somebody to report us and have some federal government come knocking at my door because of my background in all these podcasts.
Yeah, you have guns, you have dynamite, you have dead animals, and you have
Listen, I don't have any guns here. Don't tell all my guns fell off a boat in the middle of the ocean. I don't have any guns.
unregistered, no serial numbers.
So if you come to rob me, there's definitely nothing here.
Or you mean trouble because there's plenty of things that can't be detected.
Also true. Also
Yeah.
very true. So guys, we're back. We got another exciting podcast. I'm really excited to talk about this one with you today. We're gonna get a little bit more specific and kind of, I think, bring some clearer topics to the podcast than we have the previous weeks. But today we're diving into what great coaches that others miss, right? Like you can never overlook time in the trenches, experience, anybody that's watched people for extended periods of time. There's a skill set in how we observe, in how we dissect information. And that's what we're going to dive into. So, Jay's obviously at the top tier of that coaching, hours, we'll call it, hours of experience. So, yeah, that's what we're going to dive into for today's podcast and see where it goes.
This question is one of the most challenging questions for me because it's the final 10% that is able to get an athlete to their highest level. I view the first 90%, the first 80% is easy. Anybody can get an athlete to their 80% potential. 80 to 90% is a challenge, but it's doable. Like any coach, in my opinion, can get someone to that 80% range. Really good coaches can get them to 90%. Great coaches can see that final 10% and know how to get the athletes there. And that final 10%, in my opinion, is the most challenging, and it is a truest separator between good coaches and great coaches. And it's a hard question for me because that final 10%, in my opinion, hold on, I'm gonna sneeze, I'm gonna mute. That final 10% is different for athletes. I don't view that as a set prescription. And that's what makes the final 10% so challenging. And that's what makes the final 10% hard for lots of coaches to hold on to because it's not something that's read in textbooks. It's not something that's told or passed down. It's a feeling, it's an emotion, and it's a connection with the athlete, knowing what they need to really go to that far end of their capabilities that they don't think they can get to. And it's funny that you asked this question to me because I was having dinner yesterday with Wes Kitts. So if you guys aren't familiar with Wes Kitts, he's a 2-time Olympian in weightlifting, and he just retired from weightlifting. I mean, amazing weightlifter. He went to the Olympics twice for Team USA. And he retired from weightlifting, and someone said, well, when was the last time you snatched a clean and jerk? He goes, when I got done with the Olympics, I took about 4 months off, and then I built up to about 90% in a deficit snatch. And they're like, whoa, 90%. And he goes, well, 90% is easy. He goes, it's the final 10% that's hard. And he said that, and just said it, and I'm like, there it is. Like that's what separates people. And like for those guys, I was talking to Olivia Reyes. She was at camp this week too. And if you guys don't know who Olivia Reyes is, she's the greatest USA weightlifter probably ever. She just won the gold at the Olympics. She was so dominant that China and Korea didn't even put a weightlifter in her weight class. Like she is like, the Simone Biles for weightlifting in her weight class. She was saying how when she goes in with her coach to train at the USA Training Center, she has no idea what they're doing because the whole time they're training, the coach he knows what he wants them to get up to. He knows the percentages, but he doesn't tell them. He's always assessing it based around how they're feeling, what he sees from them, how they're responding. And then based off that, he either keeps them at a certain percentage or he calls it or he keeps pushing them. And this coach's ability to know what that 10% is for that athlete and then understand how to get the athlete to that 10%, which is really what makes that coach great if a coach is able to do it. And someone asked me this, actually, believe it or not, it was Chris Henshaw that first said this to me. We were sitting after a camp that we did together, and he said, you know what makes you great? And I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but it goes with this conversation. I go, what, Chris? He goes, it's your ability to get athletes to that final 10%. Right. And at that point, I didn't really think too much of it. I'm like, all right, like, I didn't really think too much of that statement that he made to me. But then as the years progressed, I always felt like that's where I excelled from other coaches, because at some point we all know energy systems, right? We all know how to train energy systems. We all understand how to put different modalities together in a way that's going to work best for the athlete to make progress. I mean, if you spend time in the trenches, you spend time programming, you spend time with athletes, you understand that stuff. Okay, now can you take an athlete who isn't repeatedly great and make them great? Can you take someone that's never hit a certain level and pull the most out of them, or can you get somebody who can't see that where they need to be, doesn't think they can get there, and then get them there? It lies within mindset. It lies within their own self-belief. It lies in the coach being able to train that belief in them, put that belief in from years of discussions and talks and getting them to understand how they should be behaving and moving. It goes into assessing them and understanding where their biggest limiters are and what you need to do to get them to overcome that limiters. It comes down to the coach being able to talk to them the right way, in a way to get them to believe in themselves when they don't believe in themselves, when no one else will believe in them, and get them to truly buy into what's happening. And when coaches can create that buy-in with the athletes in that moment of when that athlete thinks like they're peaked, they're done, there's really nothing else to get, can the coach get them to buy into it a little bit more? Do that art of buy-in, in my opinion, is where the coach is truly able to get that athlete to get a little bit farther in what they didn't think they could get to.
So if that's the case, do you think it's more about the coach being very proficient in developing habits, to being like, hey, this is where you're at from an 80% or a 90%, and this is what I've seen from a elite of the elite from a habit perspective? Are you just kind of curating that and guiding them down that path? Or like, where's the line of, fluffing an athlete versus I actually like really see true potential in this person?
Yeah, it's a mixture of things, right? You obviously have to have talent around the skill. If someone's not talented and doesn't possess the qualities that are needed to hit a certain level. So, okay, let's backtrack a second. In regards to the question, Rob, what great coaches see that others miss, and I reference it as being able to see that final 10%. Are we in reference of this question and answer being towards athletes reaching an elite state, or athletes reaching an elite state in sport, or at the highest level that they can personally reach, regardless of where that puts them in position of the sport?
I would say keep it more general. We all have our own visions of what our human potential is. I would argue that that's usually lower than what it is for most. Like we all have our own self-deprecating thoughts, or we put our own limitations on ourselves. Yeah, like if I was going to set a goal, how do you push me beyond that?
So there's three things that come to mind when you say that: habits, belief, and resilience. And it's a coach who can get the athlete to create the right habits that lead to the end goal, getting them to have belief in themselves, belief in the coach, belief in the program, and then throughout the way, teaching them resilience through the good and the bad. I say the good because you have plenty of times where these athletes will have these highs, these individuals, these people will have these highs and ride it too high. And then once they hit a low, it's like it's too low. Well, how can I appreciate the highs and not let the lows pull me out of my focus? And when coaches can get athletes to have the right habits, to have belief in themselves, and build resilience throughout the years. In my opinion, those are the three qualities that coaches can see that can get people to be great. Is a separate between great coaches and good coaches, because great coaches understand how to form habits with individuals, even when there's a little bit of pushback. They understand how to have that give and the take and how to get athletes to focus on one or two things. And once that becomes and play the long game. And once those become accustomed, then they can transition into the other habits that they need. It's being able to continually see the forest through the trees with the habit building. It's getting the coaches to have the correct wording with these individuals that creates belief and trust. And then it's the actions that teaches these athletes to have autonomy and regulatory processes that continually elevates their own belief in what they're doing and who they are. And then it's coaches seeing what the athletes need to drive resilience through the good and the bad, because everybody needs a different sort of conversation, a different sort of coping mechanism to continually build resilience when things aren't going good, right? And you see that a lot in youth sports as well. And a lot of it comes down to how these youth coaches are speaking to these young athletes, where it's this overabundance of specialization at a young age. It's an overabundance of extra work and not having creativity, not having play, not having enough exposure to different modalities, different sports that can limit them. It's also how these kids are spoken to when things aren't going well. They made a mistake. The three primary questions I always talk to my son about and my daughter, no matter good or bad, is do they give good effort? Were they coachable? And did they have fun? So what I'm trying to do with those three things right there from a young age is teach them resilience in a way that they might understand better than me being like, okay, when you struck out here, like, how'd you handle and talk to yourself? Because they don't fucking want to hear that. They're not going to understand that, right? Just being able to recognize those patterns and have those questions and format work over years. Like, now, then that's going to elevate into potentially, hey, okay, you have a bat. It was, 3-0, you still end up striking out. What was going to your mind at that? Which is you're anticipating, and it elevates to that next stage and it elevates to the next stage. And everything's a process in the developmental stage for athletes. And when great coaches can understand that process, for me to say again, see that forest of the trees of the processes around these three categories, that's what they're getting that good coaches miss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the reference of seeing the forest through the trees, I think is a great analogy, keeping them focused on the big picture, but also not losing sight on the micro habits that are going to get them to see further down the line. Have you ever dealt with personally an athlete that you're like, they've got it, like they're built for it, they've got the technical aptitude, they're super good, but it's the mindset, or like they don't see themselves as being great
All the time, more often than not.
Really, you think it's more often than not there than people thinking they're phenomenal or thinking they're going to be a champion, and being on the flip side of that, where like they don't have the mindset, they don't have the technical ability or the structure behind it.
Yeah, I think because it's you get weeded out in sport, right? The only person I ever saw who had that mindset where they thought they were great and they weren't was when I was in college. I was a basketball player, and they didn't even make the basketball team. But during pickup runs, we called them the nickname the virus, because he thought he was so good and so dominant that he'd shoot every time, he'd miss every shot or turn the ball over. So he was nicknamed the virus, right? He was like, I always like that, but more often than not, I see people in any sport where, from a sporting background, we call them practice players, where you look at them, or like the 5 p.m. hero, which is a reference like being in the batting cage before the game starts, and you look like you're, Barry Bonds, and you get out there in a game and you're over 4 batting, batting terribly, or to a person in the basketball area who in practice is dominating, shooting lights out, dribbling the ball, making great passes, dunking, and then you get in the game situation and they cowered up and fall in the corner because they're afraid of failure and making mistakes, right? And it comes down to the sport of CrossFit, where I've seen these people who have every single skill to be great and to make it around at the games, but whether it's from coming from a state of fear of failure, whether it's coming from a state of fear of letting others down or having unprecedented goals that they feel they really can't achieve, to coming into that competitive setting and not being able to be successful or express how good they are because they can't handle that. They can't handle that letdown. And there's lots of psychological discussion of where that comes from, whether it's from how people are spoken to as kids, how they were brought up with conceptive beliefs around being good and bad. And that's a whole other avenue to go down. And then to unpack that with athletes takes a long time. But I have seen more often than not people who possess the ability, the skill set, anatomical build to do great in a sport, but more often than not, they can't get out of their own way when the time comes, right? They just can't overcome it.
Yeah. So I'm sure there's athletes listening to this that are like, shit, that's me. How would you approach that? Like how do you I think there's a principle of progressive overload, and we can look at progressive overload from a fear standpoint. Like what is that? How would you put them in those situations in a strategic way to try to overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. The first thing I do when I work with these athletes is I have them work with a mindset coach, because there's a lot of them that takes specialized focused work, right? Like you and I have done a ton of coursework and discussions around mindset coaching, but it's still, I think, I look at it like being the head football coach. Yeah, they know how to do offensive plays and defensive work, but they're going to have specialists come in and be the defensive coordinator. They run the offense and stuff like that. And I think when it comes into something like nutrition and mindset work, mindset focus takes such a psychological overload from both the person doing it and the athlete. And I think if you're a
Sure.
coach with this sub person, that can take an even larger psychological overload being the coach. So the first thing I do is we always hook up with a mindset coach to get someone that's solely focused on just that, someone that can understand that burden, someone that can bear it, and someone that can work with kids properly, where now you're removing the emotional connection that the coach may have if it's not happening at the way they want it to occur. Then from there, once that first gets into place, we then try to put them in situations that can change the environment in a way that makes them uncomfortable, to get them used to some things that might offset them, right? And that might be having other people come in and watch them. That might be having them go down and train in a different gym. That might be going down and having them compete against different people. It might come down to putting pressure on them, where it's like, hey, you got to do this lift. If you don't hit this lift in 3 tries in this specific time frame, there's gonna be a penalty of X. And you want to first treat it just like you said, Ryan, with progressive overload. You don't want to throw them into the shark pit right away. It's okay. We're going to change the environment. We're going to change the situation. We're going to do things in a way that create controlled chaos, but it's going to be done in a way that it's still going to allow you to have the strength to overcome the setback that's planned for you. And then once they can do that, and then there's always, reflection, discussion around it. And then once they can do that, then you add a little bit more controlled chaos, a little bit more environmental change. And you're gradually bringing them up to try to mimic that environmental factor that they can't handle well, whether it's judging, whether it's fans, whether it's support crew, whether it's people traveling to watch you and you don't want to let them down, whether it's a fear of just failure, right? And the fear of failure is absolutely huge. And that's something I try to talk to my son about at a young age, where it's like, hey, you can't really develop and learn and grow unless you have moments where you don't do what you think you can do, moments where you might fail, moments where you might strike out, moments where you might go 0 for 6 or 0 for 9, moments where you might miss a ton of shots. Don't shy away from that, but also don't let that become a burden that it blocks you from going forward with what you love. You have to take that. Like, oh, why did this happen? Like, what were some things that might have occurred that caused me to do that? Was this one of those games, one of those days? And how can I bounce back from that? And the more they can learn about that, then the more they can grow and become better. So when something like that does occur, they can feel it and they are, well, it's coming out. I know what I need to do to adjust to overcome it. And I think these things still apply in our sport. What coaches have to understand is if people don't have a solid foundation in competing, a solid foundation in having their back against the wall and seeing what they're made of, having a solid foundation of putting pressure on themselves and being okay with that, then they have to train the athlete to get better at and doing that, or else it's going to hold them back from being able to express all the fitness, all the work they put into the entire sport.
No, I love that. Something I've gotten in the habit of telling all my athletes is competing is a skill, and there's nothing wrong with walking onto the competition floor knowing you're going to fail or maybe not perform to the level that you think you should. If there's an opportunity for reflection and you get some takeaways from it. Like I think especially in the sport, everything we do can be looked at as a skill, and the better you refine that, the better you're going to be. But I also love this idea of scenario-based sessions, right? Like Tyler, we did that when he was making his first run at team semis. We really figured out how tied he was to the environment in his gym. Everything had to be perfect. The people had to be the right people. The music had to be the right music. The machines had to be the right machines. All the things that he was comfortable with. And then if that didn't go the way he wanted it, it was just, I mean, it was a literal catastrophe.
Yeah.
And the self-talk happened, the excuses started to come. And that was a big part of this year for him. You know, now that they're going back to the game the second time, is we're taking those comforts away. We're getting more comfortable training with outside people and like almost training in a deficit, like putting him behind the eight ball before the workout even starts. And it's awesome to see that evolution just from how he talks and how he almost embraces it now. Like what was such a weakness, even a little bit of work, like it wasn't that much work, created such a big impact of just like game day anxiety and how much better that got. Yeah, I mean, when I think about coaching the last 10%, at least from like from a coaching education standpoint, you're actually getting as far outside of like sets and reps as you're probably ever going to get as a coach. Like you're really looking into the DNA of an athlete. Like what really makes this person tick, and how do you strategically pull on those individual guitar strings to find what the breaking point is, or what the kind of like irritation point is, and lean into that in a really smart, strategic way. I like it. I like it. I think that's where we end it. That's a mic drop.
Perfect.
That's a mic drop right there. Cool. Guys, I hope that made sense. I hope you guys took something away from that. What great coaches see that other miss. If you guys have any opinions on it, for sure, drop something in the comments. Like give us something else to kind of jam about. We'd love to hear what you guys think about the episode. So definitely check us out on Instagram, check us out on Spotify, leave us a review. But till next week, we'll talk to you guys soon.